And I'm switching to English to introduce our next topic and keynote speaker. To solve the climate challenges we face, we need holistic strategies for economies. And to develop them, we need thought leaders from all sectors of industry, business, science, the arts, and civil society to be involved. And Charles Hopkins is among them. The title of his keynote is Education for Sustainable Development in the 21st Century, and he was awarded the Clean 50 Lifetime Achievement Award just a few weeks ago for his work on global scale, and he is one of Canada's most important sustainable leaders. Charles Hopkins owns the UNESCO chair in reorienting education towards sustainability at York University, and he does so much more, so which would go beyond the scope here, but we are very honored that he's joining us today. So a warm welcome to you, Charles Hopkins, and congratulations for the award. How are you? Hello, Charles. You're online.
Hello.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, congratulations for the award. That's amazing.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, what role do such awards play for you? We have a time delay, sorry.
I noticed that, so I will try to avoid looking at myself in the screen.
I would like to ask you, what role do such awards play for your, the achievement of your goals?
Yeah, well, I think what was so unique about this one is that it came from the private sector and an initiative to try and bring together groups right across the community to and reward and say thank you to the people who reach out to other disciplines. It's so important. No one discipline can do it alone. And so we need to start talking with one another, to hold the discussions, to look at ways in which we can collaborate and ways in which we can just experiment in new ideas. You know, so much of this is not, it's so new. There is no symphony written for this. It's about jazz. We don't really know. We need to have the impromptu. We need to have people doing things. And when it works, okay, well, let's keep that one. And let's look on. And eventually the score will be written. And we will have the master plan kind of thing, you know. But by the time we have the master plan, things will have changed, right?
Thank you so much. I love it. It's not a symphony, it's jazz. It's wonderful. Yeah, we are looking so much forward to your keynote and the questions of our audience afterwards. So we are listening now to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, and good morning from Toronto. And but at any rate, thank you, Catherine, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to be here. Also, a special thanks, I guess, to Helga Prominger for suggesting that I join this educon conference. Let me set up my screen share, because I have put some ideas together just to get the discussion up and going. You know, Andreas just gave a couple of hours ago a wonderful presentation. The idea that he raised are really so important. You know, questioning, how do we prepare someone to live in the 21st century? What do we teach? What is the content? What are the skills that people will really need? So by putting up the questioning sort of the values, the ethics, and so on. But the important thing that I think he mentioned that I want to build my talk around is this idea of, are the sustainable development goals sort of the missing link? You know, he brought up the idea of the various risks and threats that are out there that our students are going to face. You know, many of our students today will actually be in the 22nd century, but they will see the full range that will be coming forward. Normally, we're talking about up to 2030. 2040, 2050, etc. But we're questioning what should we, how should we prepare people for now? Now, if we look at the World Economic Forum is every year brings forward what they refer to as the Global Risk Report. And if we look at this, I think there are several things that pop out. One, when I looked at it, was to see the relative size of the infectious diseases, COVID and so on. That risk that is out on the outside is not nearly as large as the one about climate failure, you know, and it's even smaller than the one around social instability. So the other thing that's really interesting is that when these risks are presented, they're presented in a way that shows the networking, the interconnectedness, the links between the social, environmental, and economic, and even the governance sections. So this is a much more complete way of looking at them. Usually when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals in a minute, you'll see that they're sort of isolated boxes. They aren't really, of course, they are all together like in a patchwork quilt. They are connected, but I love the way in which this is depicted. And so what can we learn from this? Well, one of the things that I think we need to learn is that by working with individual disciplines, this isn't the real world, and that we're going to have to look at our education systems. We do it fairly well in kindergarten and in early schooling. But as we move through and introduce the various disciplines, I think we're going to have to augment that with phenomenal learning, with place-based learning, with project learning, where we take on an issue in its entirety and then look at it through the lens of the various disciplines. Right? So this, I think, is an important thing to learn. But these global issues, of course, we have global goals. This is the United Nations, well, our own nations working through the United Nations as a way of collectively addressing them. You know, there are many of these issues that no one nation can address on its own. And so we have to work at them collectively. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are part of the 2030 agenda, right? This is our third attempt at trying to bring in an implementation plan to address that bigger picture of sustainable development and trying to create a more sustainable future. We had the first one with Agenda 21, which really gave birth to Education for Sustainable Development. That ran from 1992 after Rio through to 2000. And then we had the Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015. And now we're into the third implementation plan from 2015 to 2030. Now, I mentioned this primarily for policymakers and so on, and curriculum developers, is to understand that the Sustainable Development Goals that are here now will likely go away in maybe 5-6 years, and we'll be working on the next implementation phase. But the core concept of searching for a more sustainable future will certainly stay and be with us. But at the moment, how are we doing this? Well, we have our own goal in Sustainable Development Goal 4 with its 7 targets, and of course, we're all working all the way from preschool all the way through to lifelong learning and trying to build this collectively. Germany is doing an excellent job. And the one, 4.7, which really I want to talk about, that knowledge and skills for sustainable development, what we refer to as education for sustainable development. Germany is a world leader and has taken the lead in the world stage in hosting conferences and developing pioneering ways of moving forward. Now, what is education for sustainable development? Because I think this enters into the conversation that you're having at educon. We don't think of it as a separate discipline. I mean, the original concept, I was part of the writing team for Rio as we were developing this back in the late 1980s or early 1990s. It boils down to sort of four things. The first being access and retention in a quality education, right? And we can have many discussions about what is quality, right? And any education that does not include addressing the future and in a sustainable future, I think you would question the quality of that education. The second thing, however, is the idea that it's addressing that it's our most educated countries that are often creating some of the greatest sustainability issues. So the idea is not to just take what we had in the 1980s and 1990s as a quality education, measuring each discipline and so on, with the underpinning objective or philosophy of personal growth and personal development and so on, and reorienting that. But how do we go about and do that? This is the important part, where what we commonly think of as the most important aspect of ESD is this reorienting the purpose, reorienting the approaches and so on. So that UNESCO, who was charged as the UN agency and responsible for this, it refers to ESD as a holistic learning approach that empowers the learners to take informed decisions and so on, and not just for today, but for future generations as well. So that second, the first of access and retention, the second of reorienting existing, but the third one is recognizing that we have to have the general public on board. The negotiators at COP in Glasgow right now, we are urging them to move forward, but they cannot move if it means that in the next election, they will be thrown out of office. So we have to have public awareness, public understanding, support for leaders, whether it's leaders in business and industry, leaders in government, or wherever it happens to be. So it's an extremely important part, and this isn't just the role of schooling, right? This is a collective that needs to be done by those within our society who inform others. And then the last part is training programs where we do know how to do things better, right? Then we must share that and inform, whether it's in handling of waste stream or health techniques and so on. So if we go back then to 4.7 and look at the target, it says by 2030, ensure that all learners, and now this includes higher education, preschool, adult education, training programs, and so on, that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. And they talk about through two main vessels, one being education for sustainable development, and the other being global citizenship. And we look at this in conjunction with education for sustainable development being largely the knowledge and skills to address these global issues. And global citizenship, the skills and the abilities and the willingness to participate, to act as responsible citizens, not only locally, but globally. So the two are totally symbiotic. And in fact, they're so important that on 3 occasions, 2017, 2019, and again this year in 2021, the United Nations General Assembly has stated that ESD, Education for Sustainable Development, is not only a vital part of Sustainable Development Goal 4, but it is a key enabler of all the other Sustainable Development Goals. And it's explicitly mentioned throughout the 2030 Agenda. Now, UNESCO has come up with a series of programs. We had the UN Decade of Education for Sustainable Development from 2005 to 2014. And Germany hosted the midterm conference in Bonn, Germany in 2009. Following the decade, UNESCO held the Global Action Program, or GAP, and that ran till 2019. And now from 2020 to 2030, we have what referred to as ESD for 2030. And they've produced a roadmap for us to move forward on. Now, the roadmap shows the breadth, and there are 5 priority action areas, one being advancing policy, which engages government, local governments, national governments, state governments, and so on, in advancing the policy. The second, though, is transforming learning environments, and I think this is where I would like to come back to. And what Andreas hinted at is transforming schooling but all learning environments throughout the community. The third is building the capacities of educators, because we were never really exposed to that. We had a very sort of narrow focus. And fourthly is empowering and enabling youth. And the fifth is accelerating things to build more sustainable communities. And I put in the diagram, I know you probably will not be able to read it, but what I was trying to look at and show is that not only is it the cognitive learning, but the social, emotional, and behavioral aspects in combination, and then reaching that out through the disciplines and so on to engage all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals in a kind of framework. Now, I said transforming learning environments, and I'd like to show sort of the parallel with what Andreas was talking about with the learning compass. What UNESCO is talking about in transformation is these sort of 4 steps. The first being, yes, the acquisition of knowledge and information. This, of course, is key. The second thing is critical analysis and understanding the complexity of those realities. Just as I showed you that first, the risks by the World Economic Forum, the ties and so on, that all come together. That it is complex, but it can be done, right? In fact, it has to be done. But in that critical analysis, developing the skills of understanding, okay, what information can I count on? Where do I get information? How do I take this information and place it in some sort of overall framework so it isn't just random facts? How can I do this? But the third one is the experiential exposure of the realities, building the connection, and in fact going even beyond that in building an emotional connection, building a compassion. And we don't do that in classrooms. It means that we need to get out. Well, we can do some of it, but really we need to have experiential education. And hopefully through this addition of compassion, which is sort of different from the learning compass. But doing this, we hope that the result will be a knowledgeable, compassionate mind set on combined with empowerment and the willingness to become involved and assume your role as a global citizen. Now, I suggest that we look at the Sustainable Development Goals as a kind of framework. Right? The example on the left here of COVID, and you can see it is connected, although it is a phenomena that is going on, it is connected to all of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we could take any issue, I believe, that any one of those risks, whether it is COVID or whether it is climate change, biodiversity loss, Black Lives Matter, massive immigration and social incohesion. We can put that into the center and then look at the 17 big goals that the world has looked at. And then we can take these and bring it down into the local level, making it more real, more relevant and appropriate, right? We can look at it as to what is missing in the goals. I mean, the goals are simply the ones that the nations could all agree to. There are other goals that they couldn't agree to. And this would be up to the students to look at and talk about. And we can look at it through the lens of what do we try to prevent? What are the kinds of things we try to mitigate or lessen the impact, ameliorate in some way? And what are the things that are inevitable that we are going to have to adapt to? And how do we peacefully and thoughtfully plan for this kind of adaptation? Now, doing this, you may think, well, how does this relate to what we're supposed to be doing in the classroom? And so I'd like to think, we all are trained, I think, globally in Bloom's taxonomy of looking at different levels of learning and understanding. And so in the chart on the right, I sort of look at the two things, one being what we can measure, from very high, we know 2 + 2 = 4, and we can mark that. So that's the vertical axis. The horizontal is the certainty of it happening. And so the idea of Bloom's taxonomy, that whole sphere of knowing, that's levels 1, 2, and 3. And then the next stage, though, is not just the transferring of known facts, but in analyzing and critically thinking about these things, right? Level 4. And then you get into levels 5 and 6, into creating, to bringing different pieces of information together and then actually engaging and doing things. So we can take our taxonomy and what we've been trained in and so on, and prove that we can develop these kinds of 21st century critical thinking skills, and we can do it using the Sustainable Development Goals as a kind of framework. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is the engagement of students. And I know in Germany, there is a lot of work going on. How can we move from the idea of marking students absent because they are participating and as thoughtful citizens and practicing their human rights, right? How can we move from that to where we actually recognize what they are doing and building this right into the curriculum? The kinds of critical thinking skills and participation and learning communication skills and so on that are so important in that hidden curriculum that we know is there, but we never really address, mark, comment on, and so on. So how do we do that? This is the really important part of how do we prepare people to thoughtfully and with sound information take part in their own future. So let me leave it at that point, and thank you so very much again for inviting me to take part in this. Thank you.
Yeah, we have to thank you, Charles, for the brilliant input and the brilliant content you gave us. And we have questions of our audience. Let me have a look. Yeah, there's one comment in the chat. Thanks for pointing out the links between social, environmental, and economic fields. Everything is interconnected, and we need to remember that when teaching. Project-based learning is a great way to think globally. So, of course, you already understood this and some other too, but not all. What do you think? How can we push more the connection between economy and sustainability? Because if we talk about digitization or the transformation, the digital transformation, we often don't talk about the twin transformation, that it has to go together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It really becomes apparent there is a program from the United Nations University called Regional Centers of Expertise in ESD. And this is where usually a university takes the lead, but it brings together in a community or in a region, all of the people who do the informing, whether it's formal education, NGOs, training programs, faith-based groups, and so on, who work collaboratively. There are a number of these RCEs in Germany, I believe 4 or 5 of them. But it is in working together that we can see how the social, the environmental, and the economic come together if you look at it through the lens of the community and what the community needs. Now, we each have our own expertise and our own expertise of what we try to share. But it's only when we work collaboratively that we see how these pieces go together into something much more.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Other comment is, if knowledge transfer, so learning to learn, is only one side of the coin, how do we make it clear to teachers who love their knowledge so much so that the pillars of learning to live, act, and be together are of the greatest democratic importance? What is your advice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of our greatest challenges right now is how do we complete sort of the different stages of learning? You know, we start off with just trying to teach that learning is joyful, and then we show how to learn, you know, where to find things specifically, etc. But there comes a stage that we're not very good at. Asia is much better at this, of transferring the responsibility of learning from the teacher to the learner. This is crucial if they're going to assume a role of lifelong learning. Now, students pick up on the passion of the teacher for their subject, of course, but it is also the role of the teacher to transfer this responsibility to the learner.
Yeah, it's also, the next question is also touching this point. What kind of advice can you give to young teachers at the very beginning of their career in teaching? So where can they start in becoming holistic teachers, so to say?
Yeah, well, it's part of their own professional development and growing, but to be aware of what are the big issues in society, you know, that there is the need for their pedagogy to continually improve, especially around the use of technology and so on, because it's so easy to find yourself falling behind. And then you have the feeling, well, it's frustrating, and then, well, it's beyond me. So keeping the pedagogy alive is important. Listening to the students, right? And being aware of what they find relevant, and then being able to teach through relevance. Now, there are times when that's impossible, but if there is some there where you maintain the rapport by dealing with their relevance, listening, and really appearing to be concerned with their own growth. I think that this is very difficult at the beginning, where in the early stages, often I remember my first days as a teacher. You know, in my time, I've been a teacher, I've been a principal, I've been a regional superintendent of schools, I've been a superintendent of curriculum for one of Canada's largest school boards, and I've taught it in the university. But the idea of listening, building a relationship, and moving from being concerned about discipline in my first couple of years through to what is the big picture? What am I really imparting to students?
Thank you very much. It was such an honor to have you with us, Charles Hopkins, and we wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity of being with you today, and I wish you all the best for the educon. Thank you.
Thank you. See you.